Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. Now, we know a little of the 741st Battalion story because of their role on Omaha Beach, but for a much deeper dive, Bill Warnock, author of Dare or Dangerous, joins us. The link to his books, to his website, is all in the description below. It's available for pre-order right now. I'll bring him in now. Good afternoon, Bill. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Paul. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Good. Well, we've got a lot of stuff to get through today, so I'm going to pull the PowerPoint straight up, and it's over to you to take us through this. Folks, there's been a lot of information coming your way, so we may not have time for questions. If we have, well, they'll be at the end. We'll see how it goes. But basically, I'm going to hand over to Bill to take us through this really cool story. But if you have little minor questions about particular details in slides, then fire away, and I'll try and put them to Bill as we go along. But really, I'm going to hand over to our guest to talk about this unit.
All right, thanks, Paul. When you first invited me on the show, I thought I would do an overview of the battalion from its origins in February of 42 till the time it was deactivated in October of 45. But as I started to lay that out, it seemed a little basic and too general. And moreover, it wasn't appreciably different from what you could read on Wikipedia about the 741st. Right. So I decided maybe I need to take a different approach to this. So I came up with, hold on here. My PowerPoint is frozen. There. So I came up with this. 3 famous photographs that relate to the 741st, and we'll take a in-depth look at the stories behind these pictures. So, but before we get into that, I know I haven't been on the show before. You're always asking guests how they got interested in the subject matter. So a little word about that first. So I first learned about the 741st during the 1980s when I was stationed in Germany at Spangdahlem Air Base, which is in the Eifel Mountains, which is along the Belgian-German border. And I was in a security police squadron there. And we worked a schedule of 6 days on and 3 days off. So with 3 days off, a lot of times those days off fell during the week. You could do a lot of traveling in Europe. So very frequently, as soon as, I was at the end of the work on my 6th day, I would go to the armory and turn in my rifle to the armorer, and I would make a beeline to my car in the parking lot. And I was out the front gate within 15 minutes of turning in the rifle. And I was usually headed to the Ardennes. And my main headquarters in the Ardennes was this hotel in Bullingen, Belgium. Paul and Janine Grieven owned it, and they were about the age of my parents at that time. And it had, as you can see in the picture there, it had U.S. divisional insignias up there. So that attracted my attention right away. And it also attracted the attention of a lot of American veterans who also stayed at the hotel. So unfortunately, this hotel burned down in July of 1993. And the last time I was through there in 2022, I think it was still an empty lot where the hotel was. But and I think Paul has passed away. I don't know if Janine is still alive, but anyhow, one day, one Friday when I was staying at that hotel in October of 1984, I came down for breakfast in the morning, and Janine said, "There's an American veteran staying here that you might be interested. You may have heard of him." She said his name was Charles McDonald. And I knew the name right away. And she said, he has a new book out and he calls it his baby, which was his Time for Trumpets book about the Battle of the Bulge. So I waited around for him and put off breakfast, and time dragged on, and Janine started getting really nervous, and I didn't understand why at first, but apparently what had happened is a month earlier she had a group of 99th Division veterans staying at the hotel, and one of them passed away in his sleep, and they didn't realize it till he didn't show up for breakfast. So when Mac wasn't showing up for breakfast, she started getting nervous. But eventually he appeared and came downstairs, and I had breakfast with him, and he said, have you got any plans for the day? And I said, well, I did, but I said that I didn't. And he said, I have nothing going on this morning. Would you like to see, where my company was on the 17th of December?
Wow.
Sure. So I don't remember we got in his car or my car, but we went out to the forest northeast of Rocherath, and he showed me his foxhole. There's his picture. And he didn't look a lot different than that wartime photo of him, except he had gray hair. And he showed me his foxhole. He showed me the foxhole of Richard Cowan, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions in the forest out there. And he also talked about a platoon from Company C of the 741st that supported his battalion that day, and showed me where the tanks had been deployed and where 2 of them were destroyed. So that was the first time I heard about the 741st, was from him. So we finished up that tour in the woods, and he had a noon appointment with a guy named Will Cavanaugh, who was a British expat living in Belgium. And so we went over to Will's house around noon or 1 o'clock or whatever it was. I don't remember. But the reason he went there was Will had been working on a manuscript for that book in the upper right-hand corner, Krinkelt, Rocherath, The Battle for the Twin Villages. And he had sent Mac a copy of the manuscript sometime earlier, and Mac had gone through it and marked it all up, done edits, and made notations on it. So we spent the afternoon going through the manuscript page by page. And I think I learned more about writing in an afternoon with that guy than I did in 4 years of high school. I mean, he was a million selling author. The guy was the real deal, and he knew what he was talking about. I was amazed at the things I was hearing. I wish if I could go back in time, I'd love to have a recording of that conversation. But anyhow,
you're like me, Bill. I had experiences then that they were cool then, but now I look back and I go, why didn't I write more down? Why didn't I record things? Why didn't I pay more attention? It just seemed kind of normal back then. But yeah, what an experience.
Yeah, I was interested in collecting and doing metal detecting on battlefields, and that meeting with him changed my direction completely down the road that I'm currently following. But anyhow, that was the last time I saw Mac in person. We corresponded sometime afterwards. The following year, or in 1989, he went back to that area as part of a tour that a documentary was made of, and there's a link that you posted for me in your chat of the video that was created from that. And Mac's in that video as well. Will's not in it, but Jose Lopez was there, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions on the 17th of December. And that's a picture of him with Will Cavanaugh in September of '89 when they were filming the documentary. It had been the first time he had been back to the Rupenven Road Junction since his Medal of Honor action. So, and I knew Jose. Fortunately, I wasn't there when they filmed the documentary, but I did a couple years later go down to San Antonio and met him, he and his wife. But anyhow, so it's enough about Mac. So I was at Spangdahlem from '84 to '86, and I spent a lot of time in the North Shoulder area of the Bulge and got to know it very well, especially in the wintertime. I like to go over there and do photography and make sketches and so forth with the snow down. And there's a picture of the Twin Villages as they looked in 1986, a few months before I transferred back to the States. So next slide. When I was over there, I met a lot of veterans from the 2nd Division and 99th Division, but I never met anybody from the 741st. What happened is after I got out of the service in '88, when I was going through the out processing before getting my DD Form 214 discharge certificate, they told me, when you get home, take a copy of that to your county recorder's office and have it put on file there in case anything ever happens to your discharge certificate. They have a certified copy there. So that's what I did. So I went into the recorder's office and to go through that process. And while I'm standing there, I see bookshelves around, and there's huge volumes there. Some of them dated 44 and 45. And I asked what those were. And they said, well, those are discharge certificates that veterans put on file. And I asked if I could look at them. They said, sure. So I took them off the shelf and started leafing through them. And they had a photocopier there. And they didn't mind if I made copies of them. And I was going through looking for 2nd Division veterans and 99th Division veterans. Because back in those days, before the internet, it was hard to find guys. And with those discharge certificates and their home addresses, at least as a 45, it made it a lot easier. And one of the certificates I found was for this guy, Glenn Kiefer. He lived about a half hour away from where my parents lived. So I connected with him, and he was the first 741st vet that I met. He was a cook with Company A. And that picture of him in the straw hat is a photo that I made. In the photo in the background, he's the guy over on the far right in the white with the apron on. So Glenn was an interesting guy. And plus he had attended reunions of Company A, and he was a member of the 741st Tank Battalion Association, and he had rosters of members, which he gave me. And plus, he had a ton of photos that were taken overseas, many of them that he had taken. So he shared all those with me, and that sparked my interest in maybe doing something with this, to writing a history of the 741st. And at that time, the only thing that had been written about the 741st were these 3 books, 2 of them published in 45 and 1 of them in 46. The one on the left is a history of Company B that was published in Czechoslovakia at the war's end. And that's a pretty good, it's well written. It's a thin volume, but very well written. The one in the middle, the little one, is a pocket-sized book that was published in Paris in 45. And that's just a brief overview of the battalion's history. It doesn't get into a lot of detail. The one on the right is a history of Company C. And that had 3 authors, all members, veterans of Company C. And the publisher of the book was the father of an NCO from Company C who was KIA in April of 45. And that guy owned a company that did offset printing. So he had the ability to produce a book. So he produced the book on behalf of the members of his late son's company. So, and today, these 3 books are all very hard to come by. The one in the middle has never been reprinted, although there may be a PDF copy online somewhere. I think I saw it. Vitamin Charlie, that's never been reprinted, although there was a son of a 741st, a Company C vet, who transcribed it and put that online a number of years ago, but I haven't seen that lately online. And the other one, Vitamin Baker, was reprinted in 1982 by a Company B vet, but and I have a copy of the reprint. But aside from Company A and B, nothing was ever written about any of the other companies in the battalion. So there was a lot of room to talk about events not described in either of these books. So I started along the road of research. This probably was around 1994, 1995 when I got started with this. And of course it meant, hitting all the archives in the U.S., the U.S. Army Military Institute at Carlisle Barracks, the collection at NARA in College Park, and the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. Plus also meeting with veterans. There's 3 of them here on this slide that I got to know fairly well. And all 3 of these guys were D-Day veterans. And 2 of them used to attend 741st reunions. Val Pfister, the guy from Company A, I don't think he ever did. Company A always met separately from the rest of the battalion. I think they started having reunions in the early 1950s before the rest of the battalion, and they just stayed that way. Even when in the mid 60s, when the 741st started having reunions, Company A never really showed up. It wasn't that they really had any animosity towards those guys. They just had their own thing going.
Yeah.
And they had it going on for more than a decade, and they just kept doing that. So, but occasionally a Company A vet would show up at a 741st reunion. So anyhow, so I said I started that project around 94, 95. At the same time, I was knee deep into this effort here. I was the founding member of the 99th Infantry Division Association's MIA project. And between 1988 and 2003, we recovered the remains of 12 99th Division soldiers, all of whom were positively identified. So that took a substantial portion of my time and diverted my attention away from the 741st in many cases. Of those 12 recoveries, only 2 of them, well, let's put it this way, 10 of them were the result of information obtained from veterans, things that was only in their memory, not in any archives anywhere else. If we hadn't have been in contact with the vets, we wouldn't have found these guys. So when we realized that that was the key to success, we had a very definite sense that the clock was ticking. These guys aren't getting any younger, and we need to strike right now and get as much done as we can while they're still here. So that's what we did. And that's why the priority went to this and recovering these soldiers. So the last recovery was in 2003. My book about it was published in October of 2005. So after the book was published, I got a bit more on track with the 741st. And I think I had the first draft of my manuscript done in 2008. And when that was done, I had 4 or 5 pages, single spaced, of questions, unanswered questions that had left holes in the manuscript. So it was not a coherent work. So between 2007 and this year, it took that long to answer as many of those questions as I could. I got it down to about a third of a page that I just finally had to give up on those. I'm just not going to be able to solve those mysteries. But and we're on the 15th draft of the manuscript. That's what got published. So it took a lot of effort between 2008 and this year to turn it into something that's actually readable. So anyhow,
we admire your perseverance and dedication. You're not the first to appear on the channel with that sort of legacy behind them and their project. It's amazing we can bring people like you to the viewers. So thank you very much.
I mean, the first book there, The Dead of Winter, I knocked that out, and I had a couple sample chapters written from my literary agent that he used to sell the book, but the rest of it was all written in about 9 months. So a very different situation there. Was knocked out in a much shorter period of time. So anyhow, here's the first picture that we'll talk about. And of course, I'm sure all your viewers are familiar with this one. The thing I want to discuss here is what you see in the middle of that. Tank dozer number 9. And let me see here. So as you could see in that photo, it's an M4 with, or an M4A1, I can't remember, but with a deep water fording kit on it. You could see the exhaust stack and the air intake stack on it, and the big number 9 painted on the back of the exhaust stack. And it was a tank dozer, unlike what you're looking at here. And this is the only tank dozer I've ever seen. This one in Normandy. I'm sure maybe you're familiar with it, Paul. It's at
yes, in the Rex Museum, yeah, in Pont-en-Bessin,
yeah, exactly. When I met Jacques Lemonchois before he passed away in 2007, and I asked him where it came from, and he said he recovered it in 1981 from an LST wreckage off of Omaha Beach. And I assumed the guy knew the difference between an LCT and LST, so that he was correct in what he was saying. So I don't know if this one ever had a deep water fording kit on it. I didn't go around the back of it to look for remnants of it, but maybe it didn't. I don't know. But it's the only one I've seen. I think it's the only one in Normandy today. So that was a picture I made in 2010, I think. So anyhow, let's talk about the dozers on Omaha Beach. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about the DD tanks of the 741st, and that's where all the attention is. So I thought we'll talk about the tank dozers. No one talks about that, or at least it's not talked about nearly as much. There were 16 tank dozers between the 743rd and the 741st supporting the gap assault teams from the Provisional Engineer Group. And this is a map overlay that was created showing where all these gaps were. And gap assault teams 1 through 8 were with the 743rd in their sector on the west side of Omaha, and 9 through 16 were with the 741st at the east end of Omaha. And between the 743rd and 741st, they only had enough men to crew 12 of these dozers. So they had to find crews from elsewhere, and the gap was filled by men from the 610th Engineer Light Equipment Company. And that's a unit you don't hear a lot about in any discussions about D-Day. Their role has been overlooked to a large extent. But men from the 610th, they provided 20 guys who crewed 4 dozers, 2 with the 743rd and 2 with the 741st, 7 and 8 being the ones with the 743rd, and 9 and 10 being the ones with the 741st. And I've seen, you know, that picture of tank dozer number 9. I've seen that attributed to Company A of the 741st. It wasn't. All the dozers in the 741st were part of Headquarters Company. They were part of an ad hoc dozer platoon that was created for the invasion, and it was under the leadership of Lieutenant Frank Klotz, who had been, I think he was a platoon leader with Company A, but he transferred over to Headquarters Company to lead the dozer platoon. And just as an aside, Frank was in dozer number 12, and it wasn't really a dozer. It didn't have a blade on it. All the others, 9 through 10, had a blade on it, but Frank's did not. And one other side note here is dozer number 11 sank at about 0200 on the morning of D-Day when its LCT struck a sea mine and it went down. So by the time HR rolled around, the dozer number 11 had been on the bottom of the English Channel for several hours. And along with it were two medium tanks from Company A with the deep water forwarding kits. Both of those went down with it. One of those was the command tank of the CO of Company A, Captain Cecil Thomas. So his tank was at the bottom of the English Channel. All the guys who were on the LST, they were picked up by an LCM, which the LCT was towing, picked them up, and then transferred them later to an LST. So everyone survived, but the tanks were lost. So anyhow, next slide here. Taking a look at dozer number 9, when I started researching the 741st in around 94, 95, I realized pretty quickly that I probably needed to find some guys from the 610th who could tell me what happened with tank dozer number 9 and number 10. And I managed to get a hold of a veteran of the 610th. He was not a D-Day veteran, but he had contacts with others. And unfortunately, by the time I started digging into the 610th around 95 or 96, all the members of the crew of dozer number 9 had passed away. Up Spooner was the commander, and he died in 94, and Jim Boyette had died in 94. So I never had a chance to interview any of these guys. But I did find alive 3 members of tank dozer number 10, the one that was in Bob Kappa's photo. One of them was the tank commander, the other was the gunner, and one of them was the bow gunner, the guy whose picture's in the upper right-hand corner, Bill Mitchell. And of the 3 survivors of tank dozer number 10, he by far had the best memory. He was crystal clear on the events that happened that day, and he related to me the story of tank dozer number 9 and what happened to it on D-Day, a particular incident that I'm endeavored to illustrate here with this little drawing that I made. The drawing isn't to scale. It's just meant to show the relative position of the 2 dozers to one another, as well as a bulldozer that Bill told me about. I didn't have a top view silhouette of a bulldozer, so I just used the arrow there to show it in its direction of travel. So what Bill told me was based on what he saw that day as the bow gunner. He wasn't using his bow machine gun. He was just looking around through his periscope, so he saw what happened to the crew of dozer number 9. And also after the war, he attended reunions of the 610th, so he had a chance to talk to Spooner and Boyette, so he got the story of what went on inside the tank. And the story that Bill told me was that the tank dozer number 9 was moving along the beach. It was running parallel to the beach, and it got hit on its right side by a German shell. The shell didn't penetrate the hull, but the concussion knocked out the motor. And the crew was unable to restart the engine, so they decided, okay, we're a sitting duck here. We're going to draw a lot of fire, unable to move, so we need to vacate this thing. So of the 5 guys, 4 of them got out of it. Boyette, Spooner, Farr, and Meade climbed out, and they kind of rallied on the seaward side of the tank where I've shown those, it says SBFM in red there on my slide. That's where the 4 guys were located immediately after they got out of the tank. One guy, Stallings, refused to get out. He was just frozen with fear inside the tank and wouldn't come out. And so they left him inside of there and got out of there. Now, one other thing thing that I missed was Boyette, Spooner, and Farr were all members, longtime members of the 610th since it was organized. But the 610th, they didn't have anybody who knew how to operate the main gun on a medium tank. So they pulled guys from the 803rd TD Battalion, and that's where Meade and Stallings came from. They transferred over to the 610th on April 24th to be the gunner and loader on dozer number 10. It was the same story and the other 3 dozers from the 610th that were supporting the Gap assault teams. All the gunners and loaders were from the 803rd. So anyhow, this is back to Bill's story. Aside from telling me about the dozer number 9 and what happened to the crew and that they bailed out of it, he was telling me about a bulldozer that was moving along the beach. And that got me interested in some of the details he told me about that bulldozer were things I'd never heard before, one of which was this. What's illustrated in this painting that Larry Selman did. This is a painting that's depicting a scene over on the west end of Omaha, but it's got a couple D7 dozers in it. And if you notice above the driver, there's a metal box up there where the engineers are storing high explosives. And Bill Mitchell told me that the dozer he saw had a box like that up there. So I contacted Larry, first of all, to ask his permission to use the painting in this slide deck here, but also to ask where he got details of that metal box up there. And he said, well, I worked with Joe Balkowski on that. So I contacted Joe and asked him, do you have any photos of that or any pictures? And he didn't have any photographs, but I forget what he had, how he was able to kind of derive what those things looked like. But this is literally the only illustration I've ever seen of it. Maybe one of your viewers has seen a picture or a drawing of one of these dozers with that metal box up there like that. But this is all I've ever seen. And the one that Bill Mitchell saw, he said over the top of it, there was a camo netting, and the netting was on fire as it was moving along the beach. Maybe some shell fragments had hit it and they were, red hot and set the netting on fire. So aside from the box and the netting on it being on fire, I got to wondering how many of these dozers were on Omaha Beach. So I took a look at the landing table for Combat Team 16, and there were quite a few D7 tractors and R4 tractors, but there were only 3 dozers on the east end of Omaha with Combat Team 16. And of course, this table's dated May 14th. I don't know if it changed by the time of D-Day, but there weren't many dozers there, 1 R4 and 2 D7s. Now, the dozer that Bill Mitchell told me he saw, he said it was an armored bulldozer with a cable lift. Those were his exact words. And the photograph up in the upper left-hand corner shows a D7 armored bulldozer. It has some kind of makeshift armor plating around the driver. So, and I found other photos of different makeshift configurations that were created in the field. Down below, there's a picture of an M2 armored cab for a D7, which completely enclosed the driver. So I don't know what it was Bill saw there. I didn't know enough about an armored bulldozer at the time to ask him any more questions about it, but maybe it was something like one of these two or something completely different. I don't know. But the landing table doesn't specify whether the dozers, the 3 that were on the east end of Omaha, were armored or not. I don't know. And I was wondering why there's only 3 dozers there. You'd think they'd need more than that. Then it occurred to me, well, they had all the tank dozers there, so they probably didn't need that many R4s or D7s. The R4 is a smaller dozer than the D7. I didn't have a picture of that one. But anyhow, so back to Bill's story here in the little drawing. So the 4 guys are outside the tank after bailing out of number 9. And apparently, as it turned out, Stallings was right to stay inside the tank. A German shell came in. It didn't hit the tank, but it severely injured 3 of the 4 guys outside. They all sustained severe injuries to their legs. I think Spooner had a compound fracture of one of the bones in his legs, and all 3 guys were pretty badly hurt, and that put them down on the ground. And at that point, John Farr was the only one who was uninjured, and he moved around to the front of the dozer. Apparently, he was going to try to go get help for his wounded comrades who were down on the ground. And Bill Mitchell's in dozer number 10 watching all this, and he sees the bulldozer going along with the netting on fire, and he said suddenly there was just a flash, and he felt the pressure wave inside of number 10, and he said the dozer was just a heap of scrap metal. Once the smoke cleared and he could see it was just gone. And in that explosion, John Farr was standing up in front of the dozer number 9, and he was killed. I presume it was the pressure wave that killed him, but miraculously, the 3 guys who were laying on the ground, they survived. And later in the day on D-Day, when things had quieted down a little bit, Bill got outside of dozer number 10. I think dozer number 10 hit a mine, if I remember correctly. It was disabled on the beach, but it was repairable. But he got out and went over to dozer number 10, or excuse me, dozer number 9, and he found John Stallings still inside of it. And with some coaxing, he finally got Stallings to come out of the tank. And later on, he also looked in the engine compartment, and the German shell that knocked it out had just broken a fuel line. So he said, I didn't have the ability to repair that right away, but the number 9 could have been put back in action pretty quickly, as could number 10. I think maybe they had to repair some track links on it. But so anyhow, of all the guys in the dozer platoons, or excuse me, in the tank dozers on D-Day, as far as I know, John Farr was the only one who was killed. And he's buried at Knoxville National Cemetery in Tennessee. So I was trying to find other pictures of tank dozer number 10. I don't know if you've seen this one before, Paul.
I don't think I've seen that one. No.
Yeah, it was in an Army publication about Omaha Beach that came out shortly after the war. I'm sure some of your viewers have seen this picture. It's pretty grainy, but you can see that the dozer's in the position that Bill described it, parallel to the beach. And when I got to looking at this photograph closer, I'll put a little red circle here. I saw that like a dozer blade with no bulldozer attached to it. I'm quite sure that's what it is. Then as I started to look at the picture a little bit closer, I saw this that I've circled in blue, and that looks like maybe part of an armored cab from a dozer. It's really hard to say for certain from a photograph like this. It's not the same configuration as the M2 cab that I showed earlier, but in front of it, it looks like a motor sitting there, and below that, it looks like the tracks of a dozer. You know, I say it looks like, it's just, I wish there was more resolution to this photo so you could see, but it really does look like it's the wreckage of the dozer that Bill Mitchell saw explode. So incidentally, after he told me about the tank exploding, I thought about that for a while, or excuse me, about the dozer exploding. I thought about that for a while, and I called him back and I said, you know, you said the netting was on fire, Bill. If you set TNT on fire, it's not going to explode. It'll just burn with a lot of fire and smoke. And he was aware of this. And he said, well, I think what it was the engineers had a box of fuses stored in there with it. And of course, the fuses would have a detonator on the end of it. And he said, or maybe they had some of the charges that were already fused up and ready to go. He said, either way, the flames probably set a fuse alight, and that's what detonated everything. And I said, are you sure it didn't get hit by a German shell? He said, no, I don't think it got hit by anything. And I wasn't going to argue with him. He was there, I wasn't. But he felt pretty certain that it was the charges themselves above the driver that went off. So anyhow, so here's another picture from Omaha, really poor quality, but that's definitely a D7 bulldozer there that's been wrecked. And you can see that it has an overhead cable lift. And next to it, it looks a little bit, that blob looks a little bit like the smaller R4 dozer. It's maybe the blade on the right side of it, and the back of it, you can kind of see a driver's seat. I don't know what the heck is on top of it, but maybe it isn't. I don't know. It's really hard to draw conclusions from a photograph of this poor quality. But and this was supposedly on Easy Red, where this photo was taken with LCI 553 in the background. And so I got to thinking back to that landing table, and there was only 3 dozers on there, 2 D7s and an R4. So is this the R4 and one of the D7s, and the other D7 is in that photo I just showed? I don't know. It's hard to say because you don't know, did any of those 3 dozers that were scheduled for the east end of Omaha, did any of those accidentally land on the west side, or did any that were supposed to go on the west side end up on the east side? There's a lot of variables here that I can't account for. But anyhow, that was all I could find in the way of photographs. So before I wrap up the discussion of dozer number 9 here, I wanted to share this photo and point out the guy on the right, Larry Knoll. He used to attend 741st reunions, and Larry was the XO aboard LCT 2425 on D-Day. and they landed tank dozer number 10. And Larry would come to 741st reunions with binders full of research material. He was a really good researcher. He was a retired intelligence analyst for the Air Force, and so he knew how to do research. And unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to do anything with his work. He passed away in 1999. But Larry's holy grail that he was always searching for were the loading manifests for the LCTs that carried the 741st and the 743rd across the channel. And he searched high and low amongst LCT veterans for those manifests and never found them. And I did the same thing within the 741st, trying to find those manifests, because they would answer so many questions about which tanks were on which LST, who the crews were of these tanks, and maybe even the registration numbers of the tanks that were on each of the LCTs. But that has never surfaced, and maybe it doesn't exist. So Larry sure tried hard over more than a 10-year period to try to find that stuff. So anyhow, I thought I would put a little picture in here and mention him. It was this picture I got from Larry. I wasn't in New Orleans when the photo was taken. If we had more time to talk about DD tanks, I'm sure some of your viewers will know the name Dean Rockwell and his role.
Yeah,
with DDs.
yeah.
But, anyhow, we're kind of pressed for time here, so I can't go.
It's amazing stuff, and you're reminding us all that the quest to find history, as you said at the beginning, you don't find answers to all the questions you have in your head. You have to kind of settle yourself with some, and if you always insist on finding answers to every question, no books would ever get published ever, because you have to just eventually go, okay, I can't get any further with this.
Yeah, the LCT manifest, they were on my too hard list when I had the 4 or 5 pages whittled down to a third. That was one of the things on there, and I've never found it. It would have answered a lot of questions, because I don't know who all the dozer crews were on. I know some of the men in the crews, but I don't have a complete roster. And anyhow, so moving along to the next picture is this picture taken in Krinkelt on December 18th of Panther 318 from SS Panzer Regiment 12. I'm sure many of your viewers have seen this. It's been published a million times. And you can see one of the crewmen laying on the engine deck there. So first of all, here's a comparison photo I did of number 92 Krinkelt. That's the building that's in the background, or at least that was the house number during the war years. They don't use those house numbers anymore.
Right.
But I took that picture, I think 3 years ago, and many people have made that comparison photo, and there's quite a few examples of it on the internet. So,
yep.
But anyhow, we need to maybe delve into the background of the German armor that was engaged in the Twin Villages. So these are the only German sources for the story of what happened in Krinkelt Rocherath. The Third Company, or Die Dritte Kompanie, published in 1978, is a history of the Third Company of SS Panzer Regiment 12, and it was self-published by their Veterans Association, or the Third Company's Veterans Group. And that's a very difficult book to find today, an original copy of it. Hubert Meyer's book was published in 82, and that's been translated in English, and that's an easy one to find.
Yep.
It's a two-volume series. And the one on the right is a difficult one to find. It's a history of the 277th Volksgrenadier Division. The first edition was published in 87, self-published. And the 2004 edition, which is what this cover is from that I'm showing here, was done in 2004, and that was professionally published. So those are the only 3 German sources that I've ever found in terms of books describing what happened in the Twin Villages. So I had those as reference material when I started my work. And I also started to dig into documents that are at the Bundesarchiv. And this one shows the organization of the armored elements of the 12th SS on December 1st, 44. You can just read the date. That looks like it's penciled in the upper right corner of the document. And I've added notations in red here to it. The 1st Battalion was Arnold Jurgensen's battalion, or Erste Abteilung. That was Jurgensen's unit, and this was the only armor that the SS Panzer Regiment 12 had on December 1st when this chart was made. And they had 4 companies, 2 Panther companies and 2 Panzer IV companies. The Panther companies being the 3rd and the 1st, and the Panzer IV companies being the 6th and the 5th. And they also had their divisional Panzerjägerabteilung with 2 companies of tank destroyers, Jagdpanzers, the 1st and the 2nd. And when I was looking at this chart, I added the numbers. I did some calculating over on the right and made some corrected totals because I knew that each of these companies within Jurgensen's battalion did not have 17 tanks when the bulge started. That was what they had in Normandy. By the time they reorganized after Normandy, they were down to 14 tanks per company. And this is confirmed in the history of the 3rd Company, as well as Hubert Meyer's book also indicates they only had 14 tanks. It wasn't 17. So that changes the totals a little bit. So that's what I was doing here on the right side, was adjusting the totals that are on the original document with corrected totals. So the corrected number would be 28 Panzer IVs and 32 Panthers. And, you know, there's no correction on the number of Jagdpanzers, 21, and 8 Flak Panzers, for a total of 89 tanks. I'm using the term tanks loosely to include Jagdpanzers. But
right.
Anyhow, and the reason there's more Panthers than there are Panzer IVs is because there was 2 Panthers with Jurgensen's headquarters, and there was 2 Panthers at regimental headquarters. So there was 4 extra. So anyhow, those are my corrected totals there. I didn't have any other sources that gave me different numbers for the number of Jagdpanzers in the 1st and 2nd Company, so I couldn't make a correction there. I just assumed that what was on this document was correct. It's the best I could do. What this document doesn't show is that before the Ardennes offensive began, the 12th SS was augmented by an Army Panzerjägerabteilung, the 560th. And they kind of stood in for the 2nd Battalion of SS Panzer Regiment 12. So their numbers are not this, so they're not shown on this document from December 1st, but they were with the 12th SS when the Ardennes offensive began. However, the 560th did not play a role in the battle for the Twin Villages. They only first saw action at Dombuckenbach later. There is another armored unit that's shrouded in mystery to a great extent, and it's captioned down at the bottom of this slide. It's the Panzerjäger Company from the 277th Volksgrenadier Division, and they supposedly had 11 Czech-built Jagdpanzers. I've never seen a photograph of one of these knocked out in the Twin Villages area. There's no real history around it, and even the name of the company commander, there's a question mark next to him. So the role of this unit, whether they were involved in the fighting in the Twin Villages, it's still largely a mystery. But like I said, I've never seen any photograph of any of their armor lost anywhere around the Twin Villages. So that's kind of an overview of all the armor from a German perspective that was involved in the Twin Villages battle. So this is an illustration that I did, and this shows the 2 Panther companies with Jurgensen's battalion, the 1st and the 3rd. And you can see I've applied, it shows the tactical numbering scheme that was used within SS Panzer Regiment 12. And if you look at the 3rd Company, because of that history of the 3rd Company that was written, we know a lot about that company and what they did. And we have names of all the platoon leaders and the company commander, everybody. Where in the 1st Company, there's a lot of question marks over there. The only thing I know for sure is the name of the company commander, Hauptmann Walter Hills. And the rest, it's a big gap in the historical record. The story of the 1st Company and the battle for the Twin Villages. They bore the brunt of the action and the brunt of the losses there. And Hubert Meyer never found a single veteran of that company who participated in the Ardennes that he interviewed. There's nothing, just nothing in his book about this. And nobody else ever did that I'm aware of. I've just recently been in communication with a guy in Ireland who's writing a history of Rudy von Ribbentrop. And it's possible. I mean, he started doing his research in the early 1990s that maybe he had some contact with first company veterans. I've never asked him. He may be watching this program here, but maybe he did. I don't know. But if he didn't, I'm just not aware of anybody else. And it's a significant gap in the historical record. There's just a lot of what happened during the tank fight in Krinkelt Rocherath that involved the first company that has just apparently been lost to history. I dug into it to the extent that I tried to resolve a conflict. There's, as who actually commanded the company, the first company. Was it Hills or Walter Bormuth? And after a lot of painstaking research, I determined that it was definitely Hills. Bormuth had been the commander of the first company before the Ardennes, but he transferred out shortly before for reasons that are unknown. And I corresponded with Rudy von Ribbentrop back in the early 1990s, and I spoke to him on the phone once. And I asked him about Hills and Bormuth, and he remembered both of them, but he didn't remember precisely when Bormuth left, but that Hills was definitely the commander of the first company during the battle for Krinkelt Rocherath. And that's also stated in the history of the third company that Hills was the commander, not just at Dom Butkenbach, where he was killed on December 21st, but during the fighting in the Twin Villages. And in fact, the history of the third company says that Hills lost his tank in the Twin Villages, which would have been Panther 105. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but that's an interesting side note. By the time they got to the Dom Butkenbach area, the first and third companies had lost so many tanks that they were consolidated into a single company, and Hills was in charge of that consolidated company. And his command tank was a tank from the third company. It was in that tank that he was killed on December 21st. But anyhow, excuse me, get some water here.
Yeah, no worries. And by the way, just well done for I'm patronizing you now, but for looking into the German side, because it's quite often that people who research the Allied side just want to write about all the details they have about the Americans or the British or the Canadians, but the enemy just end up being kind of like faceless, nameless, and we knocked out tanks and we came under artillery fire. The fact you're looking at both sides of this story is to your credit, sir.
Aside from trying to sort out who was the commander of the first company and being able to narrow it down, I might add there's the picture in the upper left-hand corner is a picture from a German Red Cross missing persons picture list. These are multiple volume series that the German Red Cross published after the war, and Hills's parents supplied that photo so that his name would be included in there because his remains were never recovered after he was killed at Dom Butkenbach. And you can't see it in that photo that I show, but it does list his Feldpost number is 50943B, which was the first company. So, and the other picture of Hills up at the top, the little one, is from his Army personnel file, which I found at Mara. But those are the only pictures I've ever seen of them, and they're pretty terrible quality. I wish I had one as good a quality as Walter Bormuth. And of course, some of your viewers will notice that Hills was an Army officer commanding an SS tank company, and they had a shortage of officers within the 12th SS, especially in the armored units. So Hills was filling a gap there. He never actually transferred over to the Waffen SS, and was not an SS man like Walter Bormuth. But anyhow, one of the other mysteries I was trying to, or not a mystery, but controversy I was trying to straighten out was, when did the four companies of Arnold Jurgensen's battalion enter the fight for Krinkelt Rocherath? If you read Hubert Meyer's book, he wrote that Arnold Jurgensen's battalion entered the fighting on the morning of the 18th. And a lot of historians have picked up with that and run with it and never questioned it. As soon as I read that, I knew something wasn't right. I had interviewed too many American veterans who saw Panthers on December 17th. One of those was Charles McDonald. When we were in the forest that day, when I met him, he showed me a spot where a Panther had stopped and its turret turned. It was on a trail in the forest, and its turret turned to the right to fire down a fire break. So that had to have been a Panther. It couldn't have been a Jagdpanzer. And maybe it could have Panzer IV, but it certainly was a tank he saw that had a moving turret. And I interviewed other veterans from the 2nd Division and 99th Division who all told the same story. And it wasn't just 2 or 3 guys. It was like about a dozen or so were telling me they saw in the forest and outside of the forest on the 17th German tanks with turrets that moved. And in Mac's memoir, Company Commander, he referred to it as a Tiger tank. But when I met with him that day, he wasn't calling it a Tiger tank anymore. I think he realized that what he wrote was wrong, that all German tanks weren't Tiger tanks, and he called it a Panther when I was with him that day. But anyhow, so there's, you know, the stories I got from U.S. veterans about seeing German tanks with movable turrets on the 17th. And there's also photographic evidence. There's tanks I know were knocked out on December 17th, because I know the guys in the 2nd Division who knocked them out. And it happened on the 17th. So between veteran testimony and photographic evidence, I knew something was wrong with what Meyer put in his book, that the whole battalion entered the fight on December 18th. So the one time I spoke with Rudy von Ribbentrop, he called me. I wasn't really prepared for the conversation. He called me to talk about some files at the Berlin Document Center. And after I got done answering his questions, I had the presence of mind to ask him about this controversy. And at the time, he was the adjutant for the regimental commander. So he was at regimental headquarters, and he was in a position to know where all the elements of the regiment and Jurgensen's battalion were located at any given time. And I asked him about this, if the whole battalion entered the battle on the 18th. And he said, no way. He said the battalion was strung out for many, many kilometers over narrow, congested roads leading into the battle area. There was no way they could enter the battle all at once on the 18th. He said the 1st company was at the lead of the column that was strung out for a great distance, and they entered the battle on the 17th. He didn't know the time of day, but he just remembered that it was the 17th. And I suspect that it was around 11 o'clock or noon, but Rudy didn't have that memory to that degree. He just said the 17th. And he confirmed that the 3rd company entered the battle on the morning of the 18th. And the 6th company entered on the battle on the 18th or 19th, and he couldn't remember about the 5th company, whether they participated in the fighting for the Twin Villages, or even if they passed through the Twin Villages on their way to Dombuchenbach. He didn't have any memory of when the 5th company in the battle. They were certainly in the fight at Dombuchenbach against the 1st Infantry Division, but I've never seen any photographs of knocked out 5th Company tanks in the Twin Villages. There are pictures of 6th Company tanks knocked out in the Twin Villages. So anyhow, Rudy was helpful in kind of clearing up the story or the controversy around when Jurgensen's battalion entered the fight. And incidentally, Hubert Meyer was not somebody I ever had contact with. I don't know why. He was kind of a controversial character, and I don't know why. For some reason, I just never contacted him. But I get Craig Luther, who you had on last month a couple of times.
He knew Hubert quite well. Yeah.
He told me about how their friendship ended when Craig, in his 12th SS book, he wrote about the murder of Canadian prisoners in Normandy, and Hubert begged him to take that out, that it never happened, and Craig wouldn't do it. So that was the end of their friendship. So anyhow, but enough about that. So on the American side, at Nara, there's this map that was drawn probably in January of 45 rather than December of 44. I'm thinking it was January. And it was drawn by Bob Utley, who was the regimental operations officer of the 38th Infantry. And he's gone through this thing and plotted the locations of knocked out German armor. And he plotted 78 tanks destroyed on here. And he's categorized them by whether they were knocked out by an anti-tank gun or artillery or a tank or a bazooka and so forth. The important thing to remember about this drawing is this was based on information that he culled from after action reports. it was not based on a survey of the battlefield. At the time he made this map, the Twin Villages were still in German hands. And after they were recaptured on January 31st, he never went back through and did a survey of all the tanks. So this is just based on after action report claims. So if you remember that document where I had a corrected total of 89 tanks, including Jagdpanzers in the 12th SS, he's got 78 on here. So did they really lose 88% of their armor in the Twin Villages? I'm guessing not. That this number of 78 is grossly inflated. And I did find examples of this. Some of these after action reports, there was a tank knocked out by one unit, the 741st, on the 18th, and then the next day a TD from the 644th hit the same tank, and they both claim credit.
It's a classic case of being counted more than once, isn't it? You get that in Normandy all the time.
So
the same tank gets counted by an infantry unit, a tank destroyer unit, and an armored unit.
Yep. So that was going on here, and I'm sure that's what accounted for the inflated number here. So I found this map at NARA decades ago. And when I scanned it maybe 20 years ago, it was in 6 pieces. And I had to stitch it all back together in Photoshop to create this thing. And this is on my website in the members only area. It's free. I didn't put a paywall around the members only area on my website. It's in there. You can download it. You just have to subscribe to the website. There's a high resolution version of it in there. More recently, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I found this map, which Bob Utley also created. So I'm not sure why he did 2 of them, but this one, he identifies 69 tanks plus 8 probables. And the 69 tanks is spread across the large map you see here, and the little one off in the lower right corner, which shows 5 armored vehicles from Kampfgruppe Piper that were knocked out on December 17th, sort of between Krinkelt and Würzfeld. And it shows 5 of them on there. So he's incorporated those 5 into his total of 69 plus 8 probables. So if you put the 69 plus 8, what's that? 77. So it's 1 less than his other map that he drew. So again, this map I also scanned in high resolution, and it's also on my website for anybody who wants to download and look at it. But just a word of caution, you have to take this with a real grain of salt when you're looking at it. So anyhow, I also found these are in these OKH situation maps are in the Bundesarchiv, and they provide some information on numbers of tanks that were serviceable within the 12th SS. And to my knowledge, none of the strength and loss reports for SS Panzer Regiment 12 for the Ardennes survived the war. At least I'm not familiar with them. If they are, maybe somebody else knows about them, but I've never come across anything like that. But I did find something along those lines on these maps. If you look on the right side, you can see where it says 12th SS PZ. It says that in a couple places on there, but on the right where it says that, next to it, there's 3 tactical symbols there. One is for a Panzer IV, one is for a Panzer V, a Panther, and the other is for a Sturmgeschütz, which the 12th SS didn't have any Stugs. It should be, instead of a little upward pointing arrow, it should be a T-shaped thing for a Jagdpanzer. But of course, they were using their Jagdpanzers in sort of the role of an assault gun, so the Stug symbol isn't entirely inaccurate. But anyhow, below those symbols, there's numbers. And below the Panzer IV number, it says 26. Below the Panther number, it says 21. And below the Jagdpanzer number, it says 33. And those are the number of operational tanks that they had. Now, below each of those numbers, there's a number in parentheses. I had an idea what this was, but just to make sure I knew what I was talking about, I got a hold of somebody who Doug Nash. And Doug has a lot of experience with this stuff, and I asked for his opinion on it. He said the numbers in parentheses are it's a subset of the upper number. What it's showing in parentheses are the number of tanks under short-term repair. So, for example, of the 21 Panthers that are in the 12th SS on December 23rd, 14 are under short-term repair. So given the statistics that are shown here and some of the stats I showed you earlier, I created a little matrix down in the lower right-hand corner where I showed in column 1 the OKH number for the total number of tanks on the 26th. And I'm assuming those numbers are not yet reflecting losses from Dom-Butkenbach. The fight was already underway there at that time, but it took a few days for numbers to get to OKH. And I suspect that these are only reflecting the losses from the Twin Villages battle, because after the 23rd, on the 24th, these numbers start going up as they start to incorporate losses at Dom-Butkenbach. So I'm fairly certain these numbers are just the Twin Villages battle. So what I did is I took my corrected total, for example, of Panthers of 32, and I subtracted the 21 number from it. And in column 4, you get 11 tanks. So that's presumably what's been lost between December 1st and whenever those numbers were submitted to OKH. And in column 5 is the total number of armored vehicles in the Twin Villages that can be confirmed through photographic evidence. There's 11 Panthers that has been confirmed through photographic evidence, and the difference between 32 and 21 is 11. Now, maybe it's just a coincidence, I got lucky there, but it suggests the math that I was doing here, that the totals in tanks were a lot less.
Great work, historical research and logic.
I missed, on the previous slide, I omitted something in the notes I wrote over there is, of all the photographs that have surfaced, taken during the war and after the war, only 16 tanks, including Jagdpanzers, can be confirmed as lost in the Twin Villages. And there's a breakdown there that I gave. There's 3 Panzer IVs confirmed through photographic evidence, 11 Panthers, 2 Jagdpanzers, and then there's 2 Panzer IVs from Kampfgruppe Piper. Unlike that little map down that showed 5 tanks there, there's really only 2 tanks, and 1 half-track was actually there. If Bob Utley had gone back and surveyed that area of that little Piper map, he wouldn't have seen the 5 vehicles that he showed there. He would have just seen the 2 Panzer IVs and a half-track. So anyhow, the number there of 16 is a lot closer when I started doing the math here to what I think the actual losses were. Now, there's a variable here that's impossible to account for, and that is how many German tanks were knocked out in the Twin Villages but later repaired and put back in service. Those won't be in any photographs from after the battle. How do you find that number? I mean, it's impossible to know that. I mean, the only thing we can do is look to the numbers in parentheses here of the vehicles under short-term repair. There was, on the date of this situation map, or the date that these stats were turned into OKH or made, whenever that was, there was 14 Panthers under short-term repair. What percentage of those were tanks that have been knocked out of the Twin Villages and were under repair, and what percent were just tanks that were had mechanical failures? Hard to say, but anyhow. So enough about statistics here. Another source that I had was this 1 to 10,000th assault map that was from the records of the 741st Tank Battalion. And there's a lot of handwritten markings on it. For example, over at the far, more towards the upper right-hand corner, you can see I put the word Ruppenven in there. That's the Ruppenven Crossroads. And there's a pencil marking right above that says, I'll interpret the marking. It says 5 tanks from Company C on December 17th, and that is correct. Those are the 5 tanks that were supporting Max, Charles McDonald's battalion, and they were there. If you look toward the top of the map where I put the word Lousdale in, indicating that road junction there, there's a little note below that says 5 tanks from Company B on the 18th. Well, there was never 5 tanks from Company B in that location of the 5 on the 18th. There were 5 tanks from Company B trying to get to that location, but never got that far on the 18th. So you have to take some of these markings with a little grain of salt and understand what's going on here. But one important thing the map does locate is the precise location of the battalion command post in number 100 Rocherath. And I was able to confirm that through other sources beside this map, but that was an important place to know. So anyhow, and this particular map is part of the bonus material that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. This is not on my website. And I also used aerial photographs. Here's a picture taken by a P-38 pilot on December 24th at 10:15 hours showing the Twin Villages. And I put a little X there next to the location where Panther 318 was located. You can't see it there. It's lost in the shadow of number 92 Krinkelt. But so I consulted aerial photos to understand the layout of the villages, the way it was then compared to the way it was today. And I did that because I was drawing a map from my book of the Twin Villages. And the map on the right shows a center part of, it has both parts of Krinkelt and both parts of Rocherath in this map. And this exact map was, I didn't use it in my book. The map that's in my book, I reoriented it so that north was at the top of the map.
Right.
North is not at the top of the map of what you're looking at here. So it's slightly different, but it covers a little bit different area, the map that's in my book. But anyhow, I wanted to point out there's number 92 Krinkelt, and I've plotted the locations of the knocked out German tanks in front of it. And aside from aerial photographs, I consulted property records for the Twin Villages that date to the war years. And I got a property record for number 99 Rocherath, which I've labeled there as 99R on the map. And the large property record there, sort of in the center, that's for number 99. And you can see it shows, it shows a picture of the building, and it shows some few dimensions. It doesn't, the proportions aren't right of it there. It shows the width of these different areas of the house,
Right.
But it doesn't show the depth, and the proportions are a little bit off. And it's coded with A, B, C, and D. A is the residential part of the house, B is a barn or cow shed, and C is a smaller barn or shed, and D is an outbuilding. And if you look at the outbuilding that I drew next to number 99 in that map, it's almost perfectly square. And you can see that it's that way in the aerial photo, whereas on the property map, it looks a little more rectangular than it really is. But these maps, they're helpful because not only do they show you where the residential part of a house was, they also show you where all the doors were in the house. There's a little marking on each map that shows you where portals were in a house. So that was helpful. And in fact, another thing it shows is a lot of the homes in the Twin Villages had names. Like number 99 was called Schwitze. And I'm not really, I mean, have you ever encountered any houses in Normandy that had names like this, where they named every house in a village?
Yeah, it actually is quite common here because actually they had house names before they had numbers. So yeah, you do get that.
You do see that. And the name Schwitze, they presume, relates to whoever built the house 200 years earlier. Is probably where that name comes from. But a lot of the homes, the older homes in the Twin Villages, had their own names. Now, number 92 didn't have a name because it was built in between 1925 and 1927. So it was a fairly new home. And it was built by Nicholas Cowpers, who ran a tannery in that house. He passed away in 1935, and it became the possession of his oldest son, Joseph. And Joseph and his wife were living there during the war years. However, they were evacuated, and I think it was October of '44 when U.S. troops entered the area, and the Twin Villages became a frontline city. They got evacuated back to Normandy. So Joseph left his home behind. So anyhow, there's some property records in my map. So now let's get to the photograph. The photograph of 318 was taken by Jim Clancy of the 165th Signal Photo Company. And he was a member of Detachment E, and there was 4 members of the detachment. And here's a picture he took on December 14th at Wallerscheid. So this photo has been published a lot, and I'm sure many of your viewers will recognize it. But I think something that hasn't been said about it is the guy in the foreground is Bernard Cook, the motion picture cameraman, and you can see he's got his motion picture camera curled in his arms there. So anyhow, on the 18th, I don't know where the lieutenant was on the 18th. It was just Snowden and Clancy that set out from Würzfeld to Krinkelt and took photos along the way. And this is their route, where photograph number 1 was taken of the 2 Panzer IVs, and photograph number 2 of Panther 126, and position number 3 is Panther 318. So here's the 2 pictures that Jim Clancy took of the Panzer IVs. And I've put some information about the guys in the photo. I identified their unit. They were with Company H of the 23rd Infantry. And the tanks, these 2 Panzer IVs, were knocked out by Owen McDermott's platoon of Company C of the 644th TD Battalion. So we're starting to run a little short on time here, so I'll speed things up a bit. So we'll move on to position number 2, and here's Panther 126 knocked out, and was knocked out by Stash Kempinski's TD from the 3rd Platoon of Company C of the 644th. And this was not a staged photograph. If we had more time, I'd go into the story behind all this, but
well, you're going to get an invite to come back, that's for certain.
Yeah,
so don't worry, we can do a second follow-up, no problem.
Because Clancy and Snowden and Cook came upon this scene when that tank was, after they took the pictures of the Panzer IV, they got in their Jeep and headed toward the Twin Villages, and that tank was coming straight at them. Some distance away, though, but it was headed toward them. And they got out of the Jeep just as the tank was hit by Kempinski's TD and rolled off the road and caught fire. And some of the crewmen apparently got out and ran across the road and were cut down and by a small arms fire. But one of the crewmen ran up the road and hid where I've drawn that little yellow circle. There was a natural spring that fed a watering trough for cattle, and he hid up there in that. And you can see, if you look at his uniform, it looks soaking wet. He had been hiding in that thing to get away from the small arms fire. And Cook went up there with his pistol and rousted him out of that thing and marched him back down the road. And that's when Clancy took the picture. So, and Mike Davis, Virtual Grenadier, he helped me understand the uniform that the Panzer man was wearing there. It's not actually a Waffen-SS uniform. It's an Army uniform, except the guy in the photo isn't wearing an Army breast eagle on his on the jacket. He may have had an SS sleeve eagle on it, but you can't really see in this photo. But one thing, I put the original caption card there, and the date on it, it's wrong. All the photos were taken on December 18th, not the 17th. So I could go more into that error, but again, we're kind of short on time and explain what caused the mistake. But anyhow, this is a record of Kempinski having destroyed that particular Panther. You know, the type of ammunition they used, how many rounds were fired, and a little information on the story of the destruction of that tank, as well as who was in Kempinski's crew. So let's move along to position number 3, which is Panther 318. So the 2 tanks you see here in the photograph, I've circled them on that map in the upper right-hand corner. The one in the foreground is obviously Panther 318. And on the photograph, I've circled in red some of the hits on these tanks. And if you look carefully at these photos, you can see these are not hits from a bazooka. These were hits from an AP shell. In fact, one of them we'll look at a little bit later. It didn't just punch a hole in the armor, it shattered the armor on that tank in the background. So I put a little collar tab there of an SS Sturm, and I have other photographs of that man laying on the engine deck where you can see his rank insignia. And that's what it is there, what I've shown there. And there's speculation that this tank belonged to Johann Beutelhauser from the 2nd Platoon of the 3rd Company. You know, his normal platoon leader's tank would have been 325, but that tank was under repair at the time, and maybe he took Panther 318 as the replacement. That's just speculation. But one thing I do know is who knocked out these two tanks, and that was two tanks from Company C of the 741st, commanded by Fred Niedrich and Corporal Curtis Hall. And these tanks were both deadlined. They were not immobilized, but they were down for maintenance. Hall's tank had problems with the electrical generator. They were both still able to move, but they had mechanical problems. And it was those two tanks that got both of these tanks here. There's another picture of Panther 318 taken in February of 45, and the little green arrow is showing the rain guard. You can see how it's all bent up in that photograph there. It's angling up in the air. On the previous photo, there's no damage to it. The damage to that occurred on January 31st. And if we had more time, I'd go into the 463rd Ordnance Evacuation Company and their markings painted on the tank. But in the interest of time, I'll skip over that. Here's a picture taken on December 1st, and you can see the catastrophic damage to the other side of the turret of 318. And I think what happened on December 31st is that thing was hit by an artillery shell, and it just shattered the side of that thing, and it bent up the rain guard on that side. And it probably blew the body of that guy on the engine deck off into the front yard of number 99 Rocherath, where he was photographed later by several different people lying there. So at least that's the most logical explanation for what caused that kind of damage. And there is a photograph, there is motion picture film from the morning of the 31st. And you can see on that morning, the rain guard was still intact. And by the end of the day, it was bent up. So it had to have happened that day. Probably as the Americans were recapturing the village, the Germans were shelling, and maybe that's when it was hit. So here's a picture of number 92. And the tank in the picture is the one that I've circled in red there. And the X shows the position that it's in the photograph here. And the one thing you can see on the photo is you can see one digit of its tactical number. The third digit was 5. And by process of elimination, I narrowed it down to one of those 4 possibilities, 105, 115, or 315, or 335. All the others that had a 5 as the 5th digit, I accounted for through photographs or other means. So here's a photo of 2 more tanks. It's the one circled in red on this photograph that shows the position they were knocked out in, and the X's show where these tanks appear in this photograph. And you can see the one in the foreground there. It too has a 5 as the third digit of its number, but you can't read the other 2 digits. So between one of those 2, I'd be willing to bet one of them was 105, Walter Hill's tank. But, I've just never seen another photograph that shows any more of the numbers on either of those 2 tanks other than the third digit. But you can see the hit on the corner of the turret of that one in the foreground. It just shattered the armor, because these were AP shells fired from about 150 meters. And at that range, even an M4 Sherman with the old 75 on it could do catastrophic damage to a Panther. So here's some motion picture film that Clancy took that day. The whole thing is 37 seconds. So it starts out with smoke pouring out of the German tank that was in the little map that I had. The northernmost one that was one on the top, that's the one that in the first clip or in the first shot. So anyhow, I'll play the whole sequence. Let me see here.
There we go. Wow.
There's a couple shots here.
There we go. Yeah.
On the more, you can see the rain guard isn't bent up in that photograph yet. And there's the body of the guy there. So anyhow, moving on. I have a few more slides here, and I think we can wrap it up in another 10 minutes or so. I'll try to move it along, but this is a close-up of that map. And what I did is I showed the location where those 2 deadline tanks of Hall and Niedrich were located. They were located right next to 100 Rocherath. And in that area, I don't know the specific spot where each tank was located. If I did, I could better define the cone of fire that I showed here. So the red cone of fire is just approximate because I don't know the exact location of each tank, but it shows roughly the kill zone there. And you can see there's 4 German tanks in that kill zone, including 318 and the 2 Panthers behind it there. And the distance between Hall and Niedrich and those tanks was about 150 meters. So pretty darn close. And there's a picture of Niedrich over to the right. And I don't have a picture of Curtis Hall. He was KIA at the end of January, but all the members of Hall's crew and Niedrich's crew received a Bronze Star for their actions in knocking out German armor, especially these 4 that you see here in the map. And you can see behind number 99, there's kind of there's a ghost area there where, you know, they if German armor got behind that, they didn't have a shot at them. And you notice there's no German tanks knocked out in that area, in that white area on the other side of 99 Rocherath. So here's a picture of number 100 Rocherath, which was the battalion command post. A good chunk of the building, the whole barn portion of it was torn down in 2011. But if you see the road that runs in front of the house and it curves, right up in that curve is where Hall and Niedrich were positioned, somewhere around in that area, both of those tanks. And I could say a lot more about Colonel Skaggs and some of the events that happened in the basement of that command post, but we don't have a lot of time for that. And I'd really like to talk about this guy, Ed Sledge, the CO of Company A. I know you know his nephew. He's been on here.
Yeah,
several times. So there's some things. If I come back, we can talk a little bit more about that and a little.
Oh, you're coming back. There's no, if you want to come back, you're coming back. Don't worry about that. Yeah.
An altercation that occurred between Sledge and Skaggs in this command post here, but I wish we had time for that, but we'll have to come back to talk about that. So
I just want to say that, by the way, what you've just done over the last 20 minutes, that's how to do a then and now, folks. I get frustrated with those ones on the internet where here's a place then, no units, no information, no nothing. I mean, they're all right, but you've done it properly. Thank you. Kudos to you.
So one of the other guys who was involved in this battle in the Twin Villages was Joe Dew, was a platoon leader with Company C, the 741st, and a DSC recipient. He got the DSC for actions in September of 44. And his tank was Hall's tank, and he left it behind because it had mechanical difficulties, and he commandeered the company commander's tank, Captain Young of Company C, and he took Young's crew, and they went up to number 90 Rocherath and backed it into a barn there and had an ambush position in there. And I know exactly where he was located, so I can much better calculate his field of fire there in red. So he's about 119 meters to the road, you know, a straight shot there. And a tank that falls within his kill zone was Panther 305, who was that was the command tank of Kurt Brodel, who commanded the 3rd Company. And it was Dew and his crew who knocked out that tank. The position I show there for Brodel's tank is where it came to a rest after it was hit. It may have been hit a little earlier before that and rolled to a stop at that position. But Dew described it as having about an 18-inch wide jagged hole in the side of it. And I do have a photo in my book that shows that jagged hole where his AP shell hit it and just shattered the armor. So anyhow, also in the picture there, Joe Dew's daughter, Elaine, wrote a biography of her father. And to my knowledge, it's the only biography of a not 741st Tank Battalion soldier ever written. And she published that in, there it is. She published it in 2000. Yeah, she published it in 2018. And I think you still get it on Amazon. It was print on demand. So it's a good overview of her father's life story. So here's the barn that he was in. I mean, it looks like an old structure, Paul, but the whole thing was destroyed during the battle and rebuilt after the war. And I could probably talk quite a bit about the building, but it originally had 2 residents in it with a shared barn. Today, there's only one residence and the rest of it is barn, but it's more or less on the same footprint of the house that was destroyed during the battle. And I think the barn door was in the same place then as it is today. And that's where Joe Dew was inside that barn firing from there. There's an interesting story in Elaine's book, as well as in my book, about how he got out of that barn when a German tank came after him. It's a miracle they got out of there without getting hit. But anyhow, and I had the property record for that building, so that helped me understand what it looked like then versus today. And I took that picture, I think 3 years ago. And there's Panther 305, a couple shots of it with a picture of Kurt Brodel. And the one picture that shows the other side of this tank, the left side of it, is in my book, where you can see the hit, that big jagged hole in the side of it. You can just barely see it in the photograph that I published. It's the only one I've ever seen of the other side of this tank. So we can kind of wrap it up here with, we're not going to have time to get to the third photo.
We'll do that in the second one. Don't worry.
That's the cover photo on my book. So, but anyhow, 741st Tank Battalion losses in the Twin Villages. That's not a matter of a lot of guesswork and trying to manipulate numbers like I was doing earlier with the German losses. There's very precise information on the 741st Armor that were lost. There was a total of 9 tanks lost, including one T2 tank recovery vehicle. And up at the top there, I cite the reference source I had for this, where I got it from at NARA in the G3 Journal, the 2nd Infantry Division. It was a Tanks Available report that the 741st provided the 2nd Division headquarters on December 21st. And it narrowed down the losses, or it specifically defined the losses to what I'm showing here. But it also showed something that I've notated down at the bottom. It mentions there were 3 tanks from Company A that were destroyed by their crews. I never found a photograph of those tanks that were scuttled by their crews. I never found a member of Company A who told me they destroyed their tank. It's still largely a mystery where that happened, or what I couldn't. That was on my too hard list that of questions that I couldn't solve. And I just finally had to, I can't say anything more about it other than the note that I put here. Whereas the other 9 tanks up there, there's photographs of quite a few of those that are in my book. So anyhow, if we come back sometime, we can dig into the story of this photo here.
Well, we definitely will. There's no question about it. If you want to come back, you're coming back. I've got spaces. We can do it in late November or December. No problem at all. Yeah, I mean, amazing stuff, Bill. I mean, I knew it was going to be good. And we got a couple of representative comments from viewers. Tony said, such incredible detail, just reading Saw Beach, and this is in the same category. Pre-ordered Bill's book already. Wow. And Vault 5 Dweller, as the grandson of a 41st member, this has been a revelation. It's been quite difficult to find such fine-grained detail on this small battalion. Thank you. So there you are, another family member. So people have obviously really enjoyed it, which is good. So remind us about the pre-order details. And
the bonus material is
the bonus material.
I included that assault map of the Twin Villages that has all the pencil markings from the 741st. That's in there, as well as their D-Day after action report, which is quite good. It's actually their unit journal for June of 44, which is quite good. And I included 2 other 1 to 10,000ths maps in there. This is all material that is not on my website, and I'm not ever going to put it on my website. It's only available to people who buy the book and provide me a copy of the receipt through the end of the year. The best thing that I have is my English translation of several chapters from the 3rd Company. I translated the chapters that cover August of 44 through January of 45. It was a translation that I did about 30 years ago. And I decided rather than just having it languish in my file cabinet, I would make it available. So I put it together, and I also had a lot of photographs in the back that aren't in the original German language book. Some of the photos are unpublished. I put some maps in there, trying to think what else I added to it. But there's a roster of personnel from the 3rd Company that another researcher did, and I included that in there. So that is available as an ebook that I can send out. It's a PDF that I'll send out to anybody who's interested in it. So I mean, that translation for some people might be the worth of the price of the Dare All Dangers book to have that. I know some people that are maybe more interested in the Waffen SS side of things, US, but
well, I think they're interested in both. I mean, and Yuri Beckers, who paid you a nice compliment earlier, said, "I've been going through this bonus material a bit. It is great, Bill. Thank you for doing that with the pre-order." And Willie Robertson, absolutely fantastic, Frenzy of Details. Thank you, Bill. So yeah, great stuff on my Christmas list as Skeptical Observer there. So so you've job done. So yeah, I'll email you and we'll set up a date to come back, Bill. I want to remind people, folks, that I'm going to be appearing with Eddie and Joe in a few minutes' time on the history of Second World War day by day. I've just put the link in there, so go and find. I'll put the QR code up. So scan that code, folks, and that will take you to the channel I'm appearing on as a guest in a few minutes' time. So I'll leave that there for a few seconds. So Bill, we can see the result of these 2 decades plus of work on the book, plus the decade before that. If I'm keeping. If you said they were there 84, you met Charles McDonald. So that's 4 decades, isn't it?
Yeah, long time.
Long time. Well, it must be really rewarding to get to the point where the book is out to order. So fantastic stuff. So that's the QR code to join me on Eddie and Eddie with Eddie's channel. Thank you, Bill. I will see you all again tomorrow when we're talking about US field artillery. Thank you, Bill. Field artillery in World War II from the US point of view tomorrow. So I will see you all tomorrow or in a few minutes if you join me on the other channel. So cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your great comments. Thanks, Bill. See you next time. Bye.